Christiana Figueros joins me now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Christiane.
So, I mean, I found it really kind of quite catastrophic to hear this report. Are you sort of depressed or energized by this dire warning that we've just heard?
Well, as you might expect, characteristically for me, I'm actually quite energized because it really, for the first time, paints a very, very stark contrast between two worlds that we are about to create. So many people think, well, half a degree is not that big a deal. Half a degree makes a world of difference because it takes us to two completely different worlds. One is the world that goes that goes above the 2 degrees, and the other is the world that stays around 1.5. That is a world that actually has more jobs. It has more economic benefit. It has 65 million more jobs. In a world in which young people are really concerned about jobs, 65 million new jobs is very interesting.
So that's a really interesting economic sort of
opportunity
that many of the climate deniers, if you like, always say, oh, no, it's too expensive in terms of economics.
No, it's actually to the contrary. It's the absolute opposite. The discussion now is whether that 1.5 degree world is going to bring us 60 or $65 trillion in economic benefit. That is the discussion.
So when they say we have until 2030 to fix this and not let it get above that threshold of 1.5, that's quite a short period of time.
Yes, 12 years is a short period of time, but we also have to see where were we 12 years ago. 12 years ago, frankly, renewable energy was a pipe dream. Look everything that has come through that pipe now, right? Now we have already 12% of all of the energy in the world is already renewable. And we're on track not only to double that every 4 years, but actually to get to 50% of all energy by 2030 will be renewable, at least maybe even more.
So this is the good news. This is the positive spin on what we can do. So actually, what must we do? First and foremost, as individuals, what can we do? I mean, they're talking about trying to wean us off eating meat and all the other obvious things. And then what must governments do?
Well, there is a combination, right? First, we have to ensure that the pattern that has been set by energy with renewable energy is followed by every sector. We're not on track with land use, with a restoration of degraded lands. We're not on track with protecting our standing forests. We're not on track with smart agriculture. That whole sector needs to catch up quite quickly. The same thing with heavy industry. So how do we get those on track? We need a radical collaboration that would be, A, governments need to set an even bolder signal than they set in Paris. Infrastructure needs to be invested in, so everyone in the investment community needs to shift their capital very quickly into clean infrastructure, clean, resilient, low-carbon infrastructure. We need to have behavioral changes because we cannot continue to eat meat that is animal-based. We have to change to plant-based food. And, of course, we need the corporate world to also shift itself over from where we are to where many of the corporates already are, which is low-carbon services and products.
For instance, electric cars will become the norm rather than the exception as they are right now.
Absolutely.
And just to be clear, for people who don't understand, don't eat meat because? Is it because of the methane released into the atmosphere? Is it because of the water intensity?
Well, it's both. It's the methane, but it's also because typically where you have animal production, it has actually been possible because you have deforested land. And so the deforestation both is emitting, but also is actually degrading the land from the capability of absorbing carbon. So for many different reasons.
We need to absorb that carbon and turn it into...
But you also said electric vehicles, Christiane, and that's also, you know, the story, honestly, the story of the year, because just 3 years ago when we thought about electric vehicles, we thought, well, that's a complete science fiction, right? Well, science fiction has turned into reality. You have every single major car company has now already announced that they are going electric, that their models are going electric. Some of them have actually said, we will turn all our models electric. And you have 8 countries that have said, we're banning the internal combustion engine, setting a date, including India. India has said, as of 2030, no more vehicles that have internal combustion engine. will be sold in India. So you do see a huge shift.
Okay, so you mentioned India and China. Every time we have this discussion, everybody says, the experts say, well, India and China and those countries feel that it's their turn now. We in the West had the Industrial Revolution, we had the economic progress, we've done so much, and now it's their turn, these emerging, massive, behemoth economies. What do you say to India and China when they say, but it's not fair?
Well, the more important thing is, what are they saying? And they're saying, we actually want this transformation because it's better for the health of our people. Indian citizens and Chinese citizens also want to breathe clean air. They don't want to breathe the polluted air that they have right now. So they understand that it's better for the health of their people. They understand that it's better for their economy because we're moving definitely into a decarbonized global economy where competitiveness is going to depend on the carbon content of your exports. So they want to be one step ahead. Okay. China is definitely leading in both renewables, in solar and in wind.
Okay, so let's say China is the second biggest economy in the world. Some people think it's giving the US a run for its money right now. The US is still the biggest economy in the world, and President Trump is pulling the US out of this deal. Now, up until now, governors and mayors and others have said, but you know what? We and the American people and on a local level, we are committed to Paris numbers. But I spoke to Governor Jerry Brown not so long ago in New York, and he said, look, you know, and so did the UN Secretary General, we're close to the point of no return, and that without our government, said Governor Brown, the US government, you know, we're not able to get to those targets that we want ourselves to get to. This is what he told me about the state of affairs in the United States right now.
Donald Trump has got his head in the sand. He wants to destroy the vehicle emission standards that California and many other states are trying to implement. He's trying to bring back coal, a dying resource, and he's not making the investments in electric batteries and zero-emission automobiles and trucks that China is doing. And all this rhetoric about China, I'm afraid America, if we keep following Trump, will wake up to find out that most cars in the world are made by China because America went down a rat hole of oil and coal dependency that is no longer consistent with the way the world is now going.
And he also says that California, the world's fifth biggest economy, will be carbon neutral by 2050, which is what the UN is calling for.
Exactly.
So that's what he says. What countries do you look at and you say, wow, they are doing a great job? Others are not doing such a good job. We just said Brazil maybe want to pull out of this thing if this Bolsonaro wins. What countries would you say the world could look at as an example?
Well, first, I don't think anyone is perfect, right? Because this is all a transition everybody is learning. So I don't think that anyone can be set up there as the perfect example. But I do think that the efforts that are being made in China on certain sectors, on closing coal, on investing in renewables, on electric vehicles, on charging stations, all of that, China is actually doing quite well. India doing similar efforts. In Latin America, because you mentioned Brazil, I think Mexico and Chile and my own tiny little Costa Rica stand out as really very interesting examples of what smaller or even tiny economies can do, because this is not a question of size, right? This is a question of we are here not playing house anymore. We are here defining the history of humankind, and everyone needs to participate. This is not about one electoral cycle. This is about how are we going to co-create the future of this world for future generations? So you cannot leave that responsibility to a few individuals who have been elected to positions of power for a short political cycle, because from the perspective of the history of mankind, 4 years is actually a very short period.
But unfortunately, as you say, you can't, but you are. I mean, this is what's happening.
No.
Well, it is, because governments are being told that they have to make these investments, like $2 trillion plus every year in renewables. And the President of the United States, for instance, is pulling out of various already agreed things.
Yes, but that doesn't stop the economy of the United States. As we saw in California, and Jerry Brown was the host of this fantastic Global Climate Action Summit, the fact is that just because the president says that this is his ideological stand, which has no backing in economics whatsoever.
But they're rolling back carbon emissions.
They are rolling
in the
back,
air,
but the
clean
all
water,
of
clean
but
air.
but the states continue to move on. It is not just California; it's actually a whole host of states that are supporting California to continue to move forward. It is a growing number of cities, is a growing number of corporations who truly understand. Yes, maybe this contributes to global climate change, but more importantly, it's about their own competitiveness. It's because as a corporation, you want to ensure that the day after tomorrow, you're going to have investors who trust you, that you haven't lost the value of your assets. You want to have products that will be able to sell. And certainly, you want to have young people who work for you.
Let me just play. You said haven't lost the value of their assets. I mean, if low-lying areas get inundated, that's a huge loss of a huge value of a lot of assets.
And lives.
Well, yes, exactly. Lives being the most clear assets. I talked to Jacinda Ardern, who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand, very, very committed to this, and at one point said that perhaps New Zealand's going to have to take in a whole load of climate refugees. This is what she told me in New York about this.
Pacific Island nations identified climate change as being the biggest threat we faced, the biggest threat that we face. But the message that came through really strongly for me as well was that we cannot give up. There cannot be the sentiment that it's solely about adaptation, that we still have a responsibility to try and ensure that wherever in the world an individual is living, that they have the option of being able to preserve their culture, their language, their place, their land, and simply conceding that sea levels are rising and that they will be inundated is not the position that they want us to fight for. They want us to fight to try and reverse what we're seeing.
So, very sensible, somebody who's saying what you often say, but all the way over the other side of the world, and she's really talking about the small, not rich, not very developed nations. What about, again, our powerful, rich governments, and I'm talking a lot about the United States, who maybe the scientists are still debating whether climate change is a hoax or not the scientists, but people in government, etc., and saying, well, hang on, we can afford to wait a little bit. Maybe these predictions won't be as bad as they're telling us now.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that every time that we have a scientific report, it only gets worse and worse. It never contradicts itself. It only goes into more detail and more scientific certainty. So the trend on science is very, very clear. And this report that has come out actually says it's the new scientific compass. There is no doubt about that. No doubt about that. I think it's very important for people to understand that, yes, we may have, for a certain period of time, certain leadership, but that cannot establish how we are responding to this as a human society. We all have the responsibility to share in this, and we all have the responsibility to make our voices heard, to see where our capital is, to see how we transport ourselves, to see what we're eating, and accept individual as well as collective responsibility.
Well, the good news is it has been top news today, this new report.
Indeed,
so people
it
are
has.
incredibly energized about it and getting the word out. Christiana Figueres, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.